Fish fingers are one of the most common foods people eat without thinking twice. They sound simple to make, don't they? That's the picture most of us have in our heads, but once you actually stop and ask what they're really made of, that picture starts to crack. Because fish fingers aren't just fish shaped into sticks. They're put together in steps, handled more than you'd expect. And the more you break them down, the fish itself, the coating, the texture, the way they're made, the clearer it becomes that this isn't the food you think it is. So today, we're pulling fish fingers apart layer by layer to show you what they're really made of and why it matters. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what you've been eating and why knowing the process completely changes how you see fish fingers. What you think fish fingers are made of. When most people think about fish fingers, they imagine something very straightforward. A piece of fish cut into a finger shape, coated in crumbs and cooked. It feels simple, familiar, and harmless, which is exactly why almost nobody stops to question it. That fish fingers have been around for so long that they've become part of the background. They're easy to prepare, easy to eat, and often one of the first ways people are introduced to eating fish. For families, they're seen as a safe option. For kids, they're normal. And for adults, they're something you rarely think about at all. That assumption that fish fingers are basically just fish is where this entire story begins. Because when you look a little closer, even the most basic details don't quite add up. Real fish doesn't naturally come in neat, identical shapes. Fillets vary in thickness. Texture changes depending on the cut. Some pieces are firmer, others softer. But fish fingers are always the same. Same size, same shape, same bite every single time. That level of uniformity isn't natural, it's intentional. Fish fingers aren't designed to reflect what fish actually looks like. They're designed to meet expectations. Expectations about how they should feel, how they should cook, and how much they should cost. To achieve that, the raw fish doesn't stay exactly as it is. It has to be adjusted, reshaped, and standardized. This is where the gap between what people think they're eating and what they're actually eating starts to form. Most of us picture fish fingers as a shortcut, a faster way to eat fish without dealing with bones or preparation. But in reality, they're a product built to be consistent above all else. The goal isn't to preserve the fish in its original form. The goal is to turn it into something predictable. Once you understand that, the comforting idea of just fish and crumbs begins to fall apart. Because fish fingers aren't made to show you the fish. They're made to smooth out differences, hide variation, and deliver the same experience every time. And that first realization matters because once the fish itself is no longer the focus, it becomes much easier to change everything else around it. This is why asking what you think fish fingers are made of is such an important starting point. That belief sets the tone for everything that comes next. And once that belief breaks, the rest of the process starts to make a lot more sense. What the fish is actually made of. Once you move past how fish fingers look, the next question becomes unavoidable. What does fish actually mean in this product? Most people imagine a solid piece of fish, something cut cleanly from a fillet, frozen and coated. That's the mental picture we've all been taught to have. When you hear the word fish, you think of a recognizable piece of food that still resembles what came out of the water, but large-scale food production doesn't work that way. When fish is processed, the highest quality cuts are usually separated first. These are the pieces that end up as fresh fillets or premium frozen fish. What's left behind isn't necessarily spoiled or unsafe, but it is uneven. Smaller pieces, broken sections, trimmings that don't meet size or appearance standards. Instead of being discarded, those pieces are collected. In the context of fish fingers, these fragments are still considered perfectly acceptable. Legally, they're fish. Nutritionally, they may still contain protein, but structurally, they no longer behave like a whole fillet. They're irregular, fragile, and inconsistent, which makes them difficult to turn into a uniform product on their own. So they're combined. Rather than relying on a single piece of fish, manufacturers often bring together multiple smaller portions to create one finger-shaped piece. By doing this, they gain control. Control over size, control over texture, control over how the product cooks. By the time this process is finished, the fish no longer tells its own story. You can't see where one piece ends and another begins. The neat, identical shape erases that history completely. This is why fish fingers feel so consistent. Every bite is the same, every piece cooks the same way. That sameness isn't accidental. It's the result of breaking the fish down and rebuilding it into a predictable form. For the consumer, this detail is easy to miss because nothing about the final product looks unusual. The coating hides the surface, the shape looks intentional, and the name suggests simplicity. But there's an important shift happening here. At this stage, fish stops being the star of the meal. It becomes a base ingredient, something flexible enough to be reshaped, adjusted, and optimized for production. The focus moves away from preserving the fish as it was and toward making it fit a specific mold. And once the fish itself is no longer whole, it creates a new problem. How do you keep all those pieces together? That question leads directly to the next part of the process, the materials used to bind everything into one solid finger. Because once you see what's added to hold this fish together, the idea of just fish becomes even harder to believe. What holds it all together? By the time fish has been broken down and combined, there's a new problem that needs to be solved. Loose pieces of fish don't naturally stay together. They fall apart, separate when cooked, and don't hold a clean shape. Yet fish fingers do exactly the opposite. They stay firm, uniform, and intact from freezer to frying pan. That doesn't happen on its own. To turn fragmented fish into a solid, finger-shaped product, something has to bind it together. This is the stage where fish fingers stop being just about fish and start becoming a constructed food. Most people assume the fish simply sticks to itself, especially once it's frozen, but freezing alone isn't enough. Without help, those pieces would crumble during handling, coating, or cooking. So manufacturers add ingredients designed specifically to give structure. These ingredients don't stand out in taste. That's the point. Their job isn't flavor, it's control. They help the fish mixture hold its shape, stay compact, and feel consistent when you bite into it. Without them, the product wouldn't survive the production line. This is also where texture starts to change. Whole fish flakes naturally when cooked. Fish fingers don't. Instead, they tend to be soft, uniform, and springy all the way through. That texture is a clue. It tells you the fish inside has been treated, mixed, and stabilized before it ever reached your freezer. From a manufacturing perspective, this makes everything easier. Once the mixture behaves predictably, it can be shaped quickly, coated evenly, and cooked consistently. Every finger looks the same. Every box meets expectations. For the consumer, though, this step is invisible. Nothing about the outside of a fish finger tells you what's happening inside. The coating hides the surface. The shape feels intentional. And because this texture has become familiar over time, most people never stop to question it. But this is a turning point in the process. At this stage, fish fingers are no longer simply fish that's been cut and cooked. They're a mixture that's been adjusted to behave like a product. The fish becomes one part of a larger system designed to deliver sameness, speed, and shelf stability. And once everything inside is held together and stabilized, attention shifts outward to the part everyone notices first: the coating. Because what gives fish fingers that perfect crunch isn't as simple as it looks. What that crunch is really made of. The first thing you notice about a fish finger isn't the fish. It's the crunch. That golden coating is what makes fish fingers feel familiar and satisfying. It's what gives them color, texture, and most of their flavor. For many people, it's the best part, the reason they prefer fish fingers over plain fish in the first place. And because it looks so ordinary, almost no one questions it. Most people assume the coating is just breadcrumbs, maybe a little seasoning. Nothing complicated, but in reality that outer layer is carefully designed to do much more than add crunch. The coating has to solve several problems at once. It needs to stick evenly to the surface. It has to brown the same way every time. It must stay crisp after freezing, transport and cooking, and it has to mask whatever texture differences might exist underneath. To achieve all of that, the coating is often a blend rather than a single ingredient. Different grain sizes are used to control crunch. Starches help with adhesion. Sugars can be added to help with browning. Oils may already be present before you ever cook the product at home. This is why the coating behaves so predictably. No matter how you cook fish fingers, oven, pan or air fryer, the outside browns in a very specific way. That's not accidental. It's the result of testing, tweaking and adjusting the coating until it performs exactly as expected. The coating also plays another role: distraction. When the outside is crunchy and flavorful, it draws attention away from what's inside. Texture becomes the focus. The experience feels complete, even if the fish itself is mild or uniform. Over time, that crunch becomes what people associate with fish fingers, not the fish. This is especially important in a product made from mixed or reformed ingredients. A strong, consistent coating smooths over differences and creates the impression of quality and substance, even when the inside has already been heavily processed. And because the coating is on the outside, it's the part you see, smell, and taste first. It sets expectations before you ever reach the center. At this point in the process, fish fingers are no longer just about what's inside them. They're about how all the parts work together to deliver a specific experience, one that feels comforting, familiar, and reliable. But there's still a step most people never think about. Because before fish fingers ever reach your freezer, they've already been exposed to heat and oil, and that changes things in ways you don't see. And once you understand what happens before you cook them, the process becomes much harder to ignore. What happens before you ever cook them? Most people assume that when they buy frozen food, it's raw, that the cooking starts when they turn on the oven or heat up a pan. With fish fingers, that assumption is misleading. By the time fish fingers reach the freezer section of a store, they've already gone through several stages of preparation. They haven't just been shaped and frozen, they've been handled, set, and partially treated to behave a certain way once you cook them at home. One of the most important steps happens before packaging: exposure to heat. This early heating stage isn't meant to fully cook the fish fingers, but it plays a crucial role in how they function as a product. It helps the coating stick firmly. It sets the outer layer so it won't fall apart during transport, and it ensures that when you cook them later, they respond quickly and evenly. This is why fish fingers brown so easily, why they crisp so fast, why they don't behave like fresh fish. Once heat is applied at this stage, the food begins to change. The coating firms up, the surface becomes more stable. The inside is no longer raw in the same way a fresh fillet would be. Even if the product still requires cooking, it's already been transformed. Oil plays a key role here as well. Oil helps transfer heat efficiently and contributes to the color and texture people expect. Even if you bake fish fingers at home without adding oil, oil has already been part of the process. It's one of the reasons the coating reacts the way it does when exposed to heat again. For manufacturers, this step is practical. It creates a product that's durable, predictable, and easy to cook. It reduces variation and helps ensure that every box delivers the same result. For consumers, though, this part of the process is almost never explained. There's usually no clear indication that cooking has already begun before the product reaches your kitchen. The instructions focus on the final step, the part you control, not everything that happened beforehand. And that matters because it changes how you should think about what you're eating. At this point, fish fingers are no longer just frozen fish waiting to be cooked. They're a pre-prepared food designed to behave a certain way. The process doesn't start in your home. You're stepping into the final stage of it. If this breakdown is already shifting how you see fish fingers, This is a good moment to pause. If you're finding this explanation useful, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps more people understand what's really behind everyday foods, and we're only halfway through, because the next part pulls everything together and shows how all this processing changes what fish fingers actually become. Once you see how the process reshapes the food itself, it's hard to look at fish fingers the same way again. What processing turns food into? So far, we've looked at individual steps. The fish itself, how it's broken down and combined, what holds it together, the coating, and the early exposure to heat. But to really understand fish fingers, you have to step back and look at what all of these steps do when they're combined. Because processing doesn't just change how food looks, it changes what the food becomes. When fish goes through repeated handling, mixing, shaping, coating, heating, freezing, and packaging, it stops behaving like fresh fish. Its natural structure is altered. Its texture becomes more uniform. And the way it reacts to heat, pressure, and chewing changes completely. Fresh fish flakes apart naturally when cooked. It has variation. Some parts firmer, some softer. Fish fingers don't behave that way. They stay consistent from the first bite to the last. That consistency is the result of design, not chance. Each step in the process removes something unpredictable. Breaking the fish down removes natural differences between cuts. Binding and reshaping it creates a controlled structure. The coating adds a uniform outer layer. Early heating locks everything into place. By the time all of this is finished, the original food has been transformed into a product designed to behave the same way every single time, no matter who cooks it or how. This is why fish fingers feel different from fish you prepare yourself at home. They don't flake naturally, they don't fall apart the same way, they don't respond to heat like a fresh fillet would. The processing has reshaped the food at a fundamental level. From a production standpoint, this transformation makes perfect sense. It allows fish fingers to be made quickly, shipped long distances, stored for long periods, and cooked easily by anyone. The product becomes predictable and efficient. For the consumer, however, this change is easy to overlook. Fish fingers still look simple. They're shaped like food you recognize. They're marketed as basic. And because the word fish is front and center, most people don't mentally place them in the same category as other heavily processed foods. But once you understand how many steps are involved, it becomes clear that fish fingers aren't just a shortcut version of fish. They're something that's been reshaped to fit a system that values consistency, shelf life, and ease above all else. At this point, the question starts to shift. It's no longer just about what fish fingers are made of, it's about why they're made this way and who this kind of product is really designed for. Because the next part of the story explains why fish fingers look the way they do, how they're presented, and why certain groups are far more affected by this process than others. And once you see who fish fingers are really designed for, the conversation changes completely. What they're designed to make you ignore. By now, it should be clear that fish fingers aren't just the result of ingredients and processing. They're also the result of design. Every detail, the shape, the size, the texture, the flavor, is chosen deliberately to create a certain reaction when people see and eat them. Fish fingers look the way they do for a reason. The small, uniform shape makes them easy to cook and easy to serve. There's no cutting, no preparation, no uncertainty. You take them out of the freezer, put them on a tray or in a pan, and you're done. That simplicity lowers your guard. It makes the food feel effortless and familiar. And familiarity is powerful. When food fits easily into daily routines, people stop thinking about it. Fish fingers become something you grab without reading the label, something you cook without questioning how it was made. They blend into everyday life so smoothly that they never demand attention. This effect is even stronger when children are involved. Fish fingers are often one of the first ways kids are introduced to eating fish. They're soft, mild, and coated in a crunchy layer that feels closer to comfort food than seafood. Over time, that association sticks. fish fingers become normal food, not something that needs explanation. That normality does important work. When a product feels safe, familiar, and routine, people are less likely to ask questions about what's inside it. The processing disappears from view. The steps we've already covered, breaking the fish down, binding it together, reshaping it, coating it, heating it, fade into the background. Design helps make that happen. The crunch on the outside draws attention away from the texture inside. The consistent flavor hides variation. The neat shape distracts from the fact that the fish was rebuilt. By the time fish fingers reach your plate, the focus is no longer on what they're made of. It's on convenience, speed, and reliability. The product does exactly what it's meant to do, and that success makes deeper questions feel unnecessary. This is how acceptance becomes automatic. And once acceptance sets in, scrutiny fades. The product doesn't need to explain itself anymore because it's already been woven into everyday life. The more familiar it becomes, the less likely anyone is to challenge the process behind it, which is why there's one final piece that holds everything together. Because even with all the processing, design and normalization we've talked about, most people would still question fish fingers if the information were clear. But it isn't, and that's where the final reveal begins. Because once you understand how labeling keeps all of this legal and acceptable, the entire picture finally makes sense. What the label never clearly says. After everything we've broken down, the fish itself, the way it's combined, what holds it together, the coating, the early heat, the processing, and the design, one question naturally remains. If fish fingers go through all of this, why don't most people know? The answer is right on the box. Food labels are designed to meet legal requirements, not to tell the full story of how a product is made. As long as certain rules are followed, a product can be described in very simple terms, even if the process behind it is complex. When a package says fish fingers, most people imagine fish as the main ingredient in a straightforward form. Technically, that assumption can still be correct, even if the fish has been heavily handled, reshaped, and processed along the way. This is where clarity quietly disappears. Labels don't explain whether the fish came from whole fillets or from combined pieces. They don't describe how much handling took place before the product was shaped. They don't tell you how the texture was changed, how the structure was stabilized, or how many steps occurred before freezing. All of that information is left out, not because it's illegal, but because it isn't required. Instead, the label reduces the product to familiar words and short ingredient lists. Those words are chosen carefully. They're meant to feel readable and reassuring, not detailed. They provide enough information to satisfy regulations, but not enough to help consumers picture the full journey from raw fish to finished product. This doesn't mean labels are lying. It means they're incomplete. Most people assume that if something important happened during production, it would be clearly stated. But food labeling doesn't work that way. It's built around definitions and categories, not transparency. As long as a product fits within those definitions, it can be sold without explaining the full process behind it. That's why fish fingers can feel simple while being anything but. Everything covered in this video exists within the space between what labels say and what they leave out. The processing is allowed, the design is intentional, and the lack of detail is normal. Over time, that combination creates familiarity, and familiarity discourages questions, which brings us back to the original question. What are fish fingers really made of? They're made of fish, yes. But they're also made of decisions. Decisions about efficiency, consistency, cost, and convenience. They're the result of a system designed to deliver the same experience every time, while revealing as little of the process as possible. Once you understand that system, fish fingers stop being mysterious and start making sense. And that understanding gives you something most people never have: the ability to decide how you feel about them based on how they're actually made. By now you've seen the full picture. Fish fingers aren't just fish cut into neat shapes and coated for convenience. They're the result of a long process, one that breaks food down, reshapes it, stabilizes it, coats it, heats it, and designs it to behave the same way. Every single time. None of this is hidden in the sense of being secret or illegal. It's hidden because it's normal, because the system doesn't require the full story to be told, and because most people never think to ask how something so familiar is actually made. That doesn't automatically make fish fingers bad or dangerous. But it does change what they represent. They're no longer just simple food. They're a manufactured product built for efficiency, consistency, and convenience. And understanding that gives you context you didn't have before. Knowing the process matters because it puts the choice back in your hands. When you understand how something is made, you can decide how often you want it, who you serve it to, and what role it plays in your routine. Awareness doesn't tell you what to eat, it gives you the information to decide for yourself. And that's really what this video is about. Not fear, not judgment, just clarity. If this breakdown helped you see fish fingers differently, let me know in the comments. I'd be interested to hear whether this changed your perspective or if there's another everyday food you'd like to see broken down like this. If you found this video useful, make sure to like it and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and lets me keep digging into how everyday products are actually made. And if you think someone you know would find this interesting, a friend, a parent, or anyone who eats fish fingers without thinking twice, consider sharing it with them. Thanks for watching.